The stars stretched endlessly across the void, cold and silent, as the human fleet drifted toward the throne world of the Zyra Dominion. Captain Elias Morgan stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Light, the last flagship of Earth's defense fleet. He watched the alien planet grow larger on the viewscreen, its jagged cities glowing faintly against the darkness. Humanity had lost the war years ago. They had no chance of winning against the Zyra Dominion, an empire that had conquered hundreds of star systems with a precision and cruelty that had no parallel in the galaxy. Every human ship that had resisted them had been destroyed. Every human colony that had tried to fight back had been razed. And yet here they were, alive, not as warriors, but as envoys of surrender. Elias ran a hand through his hair, feeling the tension of the past years weigh on him. His fleet had been decimated in the last engagement. Supplies were low. Morale was almost non-existent. The humans under his command looked at him with exhaustion, hope barely flickering in their eyes. But Elias was calm. Calmness was what humanity had relied on for centuries when everything else had failed. Calmness and reasoning. He believed that the Zyra Dominion had never truly seen humans, not really. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could change that perception. The communications officer broke the silence. "Captain," she said, her voice careful, "we are approaching the Zyra throne world. They are transmitting a docking signal for surrender. No threats, no weapons. Just a safe passage." Her tone carried disbelief. None of them had expected such civility from their conquerors. Elias nodded. "Prepare the fleet for immediate docking," he said. "Maintain all defensive protocols, but do not engage. Humanity is not here to fight. We are here to survive." Most of them had trained their whole lives to fight, to resist, to die rather than surrender. Yet here they were, alive and waiting for an audience with the most feared being in the galaxy, Queen Zalithra of the Zyra Dominion. Stories of her cruelty had spread across the stars. Entire species had vanished at her command. Legends told of her ability to command fleets that could annihilate planets without hesitation. And now, a single human captain was about to stand before her. When the fleet entered the atmosphere of the Zyra throne world, the alien cities gleamed like frozen fire. Massive spires of black and gold rose from the surface, tipped with glowing energy conduits that hummed through the air. The ships were guided through a series of docking bays that had been prepared specifically for humans. Elias noted the efficiency. The Dominion had done this countless times before with other species. Submission was routine and dominance was absolute. Humans were supposed to bow, to beg, to show fear. That was the rule, yet Elias had no intention of following it. As he stepped onto the surface of the throne world, the air felt thin, and the energy of the planet pressed against his senses. The humans around him shuffled nervously, their eyes scanning the alien architecture, the guards, the hovering surveillance drones. They expected intimidation, and the Dominion delivered it. Alien soldiers towered above them, their forearms bristling with weaponry that could end life in an instant. Their armor shimmered with a strange material that seemed to bend light, making them appear both solid and ghostly at the same time. Yet despite this overwhelming presence, Elias felt no fear. He felt curiosity. He had spent years learning about the Zyra Dominion. He knew their strengths, he knew their tactics, and he knew something they did not. Humanity had survived worse. Humanity had adapted to worse, and he believed that this would be their advantage, even here in the heart of the enemy empire. The court of the Queen was unlike anything Elias had imagined. It was vast, stretching hundreds of meters in every direction. The walls were adorned with shifting holographic tapestries that told stories of Zyra victories over countless species. The throne itself was a towering structure of black crystal, rising from the center of the hall, bathed in soft gold light. Atop it sat Queen Zalithra, her presence undeniable. She was taller than any human, her skin a pale, shimmering silver, her eyes a deep violet that seemed to look through the very soul. She did not rise as Elias approached. She did not gesture. She simply observed, her gaze sharp and unyielding. The humans were brought forward in a line, their leader at the front. Elias stepped forward alone. Behind him, his crew watched silently, their hearts racing. Elias could feel every eye in the chamber fixed on him, the weight of centuries of fear and expectation pressing down. And yet he did not falter. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He met the Queen's gaze with steady eyes, and in that moment something shifted. The court fell into a hushed silence. Even the Zyra guards stiffened, sensing the audacity of the human captain. None of them had ever stood before the Queen without fear, and certainly not with such calmness. Queen Zalithra tilted her head slightly. "Why do you not kneel, human?" she asked, her voice a melodic chime that carried effortlessly across the hall. It was not angry, it was curious. And that was something no human had expected, curiosity from a being who had destroyed entire species without thought. Elias inhaled slowly. "Because I am not here to fight you," he said simply. "I am here to speak, to show that humanity survives, and survives not because of fear or power, but because we understand the value of life, even yours." His words were careful, deliberate. Every syllable mattered. He knew the Queen's culture prized strength, but he also knew that she had never heard someone speak to her in this way. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. Her curiosity deepened. "You speak as though humans have endured everything and learned nothing," she said, her tone skeptical. "Yet you stand before me without fear. You look at me differently than any other being has ever looked at me." Her words were more a statement than a question, though they carried the weight of challenge. Elias could see the ripple of tension among the other species present in the court. They had always bowed, always trembled, always submitted. None had dared to see the Queen as anything other than a conqueror, a deity of war. Yet here was a human looking at her as if she were mortal. Elias stepped closer, mindful of protocol but unmoved by intimidation. "I see someone who has led for centuries, who has faced countless enemies," he said. "Someone who has carried the burden of an empire on her shoulders. I see someone who is tired, not terrifying, not invincible, just tired." His words hung in the air. For a moment the hall seemed to hold its breath. The Zyra guards shifted uneasily, and even the Queen's attendants were silent. No one had ever dared speak this way, and no one had ever survived to do it. Queen Zalithra studied him, her expression unreadable. She could feel the audacity of his claim. She could feel the truth in it, and it unsettled her. In all her years, no one had looked at her like this. Not her generals, not her advisors, not even the most rebellious species she had conquered. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile, and obedient, yet this human, this one single human, was different. There was a spark of something in his eyes, a quiet strength that defied expectation. He did not fear her. He did not grovel. And in that she saw a reflection of something she had long forgotten, humility in the face of power. The court whispered among themselves, the tension almost unbearable. The Queen raised her hand, and silence fell again. "Tell me, human," she said, her voice sharper now, "why do you look at me differently? Do you not know the futility of your kind?" "I know the futility," he said, "but I also know the power of hope, of survival, of understanding. Humans have faced extinction many times. We have lost worlds, lost lives, lost everything. Yet we endure. And in enduring, we learn to see not just enemies, but beings. We see fear. We see strength. We see exhaustion. And that is what I see in you." Humanity's strength had never been in technology, fleets, or weapons alone. It had been in the mind, the heart, the courage to face impossible odds with clarity and resilience. For the first time, Queen Zalithra felt a flicker of something she had not known in centuries. Doubt, curiosity, intrigue. She had seen fear in the eyes of every other being in the galaxy. She had commanded obedience. She had crushed resistance, and now one human looked at her without fear, and she did not know what to do with it. "Perhaps," she said finally, her voice softening, "you are unlike any human I have ever known." Her words carried weight, as if admitting something dangerous to herself. "Perhaps you are exceptional. We are all capable of more than you think, Your Majesty. And sometimes it is the unexpected that changes the course of history." She realized that this human might be the key to something far greater than submission. And as the hall settled into an uneasy silence, Elias understood one truth clearly. Surviving the war was not just about surrendering. It was about being seen, truly seen, by those who had the power to destroy everything. And for the first time, he felt that the Queen saw him, not as a human to be conquered, but as a being to be understood. In that moment, a fragile connection was made, one that could change the fate of humanity and the Zyra Dominion alike. And while the stars outside remained cold and indifferent, inside the throne world, the first flicker of something new, a dialogue, a possibility, a spark of mutual recognition had ignited. The throne world was silent after Elias' words. The Zyra court, which had expected fear, saw none. They had expected submission, and they saw defiance, but not the kind born from pride or anger. This was calm, measured, human defiance, quiet but powerful. Queen Zalithra leaned back on her throne, her long silver hair shimmering under the soft golden light. Her eyes, deep violet and sharp, did not look away from Elias. Instead, they studied him as though she were trying to read the story of his soul. "You speak as if you understand more than your place allows," she said. Her voice was steady, though the faintest tremor hinted at surprise. Most species I conquer learn quickly the cost of arrogance. You, human, you speak as if there is no cost at all. I know that my people are weak in comparison to your empire, but I also know that weakness does not mean worthlessness. It does not mean surrender of spirit. Humans endure because we must, and we endure best when we understand the beings we face, rather than simply fearing them. You would have me believe that humans survive not by strength, but by understanding. And understanding you has prepared me for this moment. Ilias had done something that no other species had dared. He had spoken to the queen as an equal, as a being, and not as a target of fear. The queen leaned forward slightly, resting her long hands on the crystalline arms of her throne. "You see through me," she said softly, "through my fearsome reputation, through my history of conquest, and yet you see something different." "Why? It makes me human." "Perhaps," she said finally, her voice low and deliberate, "there is a point to your words. Perhaps there is more in your kind than I have allowed myself to see." She paused, as if weighing the risk of her next decision. "I will keep you alive, not as a prisoner, not as a subject, but as a guest." To him, this was more than mercy. It was an opportunity, a chance for humanity to show the galaxy that they were more than prey, that they were more than survivors. They were a species capable of thought, courage, and something even the Dominion had underestimated: perspective. The days that followed were strange and tense. Ilias was given quarters within the palace, not a cell. He was fed, given access to the court, and observed constantly. Queen Zalithra would summon him at irregular intervals to speak, not to interrogate him, but to question him. She asked about humanity's history, their wars, their mistakes, and their triumphs. She asked why humans survived where others had failed. And with every answer, she grew more fascinated and more unsettled. Ilias told her stories of human endurance. He spoke of cities rebuilt after disasters, of planets reclaimed after famine or plague. He spoke of humans who had survived extinction events and yet had learned to grow stronger and wiser. The queen listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes interrupting with sharp questions. With each story, she began to see a pattern she had never understood. Humans did not rely solely on strength or fear to survive. They relied on adaptability, creativity, and empathy. At first, the court ridiculed Ilias in private. "Do you see what they are doing?" one attendant whispered to another. "This human, he is bending the queen with words. He should be trembling in fear, yet he speaks as though he owns the throne." And yet in the heart of the enemy empire, they found a strange respect. Not for them as conquerors, but for them as humans. For their ability to endure, to speak truth, and to see beings, even a terrifying queen, as more than icons of power. One evening, the queen summoned Ilias to the observation balcony. The night sky over the throne world glimmered with distant stars, and alien cities stretched below like veins of light. Ilias looked at the view, thinking of Earth, of its oceans, its forests, its people. He felt a pang of longing, but also pride. Humanity had survived. They were still alive. And here, on the throne world of their greatest enemy, they had an audience, a chance to be understood. "You humans," the queen began, her voice quieter than before, almost reflective, "you do not fear death the way other species do. You fear the wrong things. You do not seek power for its own sake, and yet you endure, persist, and learn. Why? We have lost planets, lives, even civilizations, and yet we survive. Not because we are the strongest, but because we learn, we adapt, and we care for each other. We understand that survival is more than just living. It is about making meaning of the life we have." The other species of the galaxy had either worshipped her, feared her, or tried to manipulate her. Humans were different. They did not beg, they did not threaten, they did not attempt to charm her into compliance. They spoke truth, and in their truth there was power she could not easily destroy. As the days passed, the queen began to ask for Ilias' insight on matters of strategy, not to use humans as soldiers, but because she genuinely wanted to understand his perspective. She asked what he would do in her place. She asked how he might handle a rebellion, a famine, a betrayal. And Ilias answered honestly, not with deceit or flattery, but with reason. The humans around him noticed that even the queen's advisors were growing cautious. Something was shifting. Ilias realized that his goal was not to manipulate or deceive. It was to show the galaxy, through the queen herself, that humanity was not to be underestimated, not because of fleets or weapons, but because of something far more subtle and enduring: perspective, courage, and understanding. Then one day, a minor crisis erupted within the palace. A group of Zyra officials attempted to undermine the queen, arguing that she had become soft, that humans were a threat, and that they should be destroyed. Elias was present when the arguments escalated. The officials expected the queen to strike, to punish, to maintain control, but she did not. Instead, she looked at Elias, then at the officials, and said calmly, "Perhaps the human sees more clearly than you, and perhaps his words contain a truth I should not ignore." Elias understood immediately what had happened. Humanity had survived countless dangers, not by following the strongest blindly, but by recognizing truth wherever it could be found. And here, in the heart of the enemy empire, that same principle was taking root. By the end of the week, the queen summoned him once more to her throne. "I have studied you, human," she said, her voice steady now, but carrying a weight that made everyone in the court hold their breath. "I have watched how your people endure, how you survive, how you see the world, and I find myself questioning everything I have believed about the galaxy. Tell me, Elias Morgan, why does your kind not simply bow and die?" "Because death is easy," he said. "Life is hard, but it is worth fighting for, and when you understand life and those around you, you see that survival is not just about strength. It is about resilience, courage, and connection. That is why humans endure. That is why I stand here without fear." And for the first time in centuries, she felt something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with respect, and perhaps the smallest hint of admiration. She did not yet trust the humans. She did not yet know what the future would hold. But she could not deny the truth. They were not what she had expected. And that, she realized, was dangerous. Days turned into weeks, and life on the throne world settled into a rhythm that was unusual, even for the Zyra Dominion. Elias Morgan moved through the palace with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to survive in impossible situations. The humans with him were kept under strict observation, yet they were treated with a measure of respect that no other species had ever received. The queen had not yet trusted them fully, but she had begun to see them as more than prey. She had begun to see them as unpredictable. One morning, Elias was summoned to the observation deck again. The balcony overlooked the capital city, sprawling and jagged, lit by golden and violet lights that pulsed like veins through the alien architecture. Queen Zalithra stood at the edge, looking down over her empire, and Elias followed silently. "You humans," she said without turning, "you endure things no one else survives. You rebuild when all is lost, and you rise when others would fall. I do not understand it. I see the weaknesses of your kind, and yet I see strength that defies explanation. How?" Humans study. We learn from every encounter. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every defeat becomes a plan for survival. That is why we endure even when the odds are against us. Why? She had believed in fear as the ultimate weapon, and yet this human, he did not fear her. He had no hidden agenda beyond honesty. That honesty unsettled her more than any battle ever could. "Then tell me," she said after a long pause, "what would you do if you were in my position? If the galaxy looked to you as its master, and everything depended on your choices?" It is in knowing the strengths and weaknesses of others, and using that knowledge wisely, not cruelly. That is how humans survive, and how they thrive even when faced with forces that should destroy them. She had measured strength in numbers, obedience, and fear. And yet, listening to Elias, she began to see a pattern she had never noticed. Species that were clever, resilient, and adaptable often endured far longer than those who relied solely on weapons or domination. "You speak as though humans are the measure of all things," she said finally. "Yet your species has suffered so greatly. You are weak in comparison to the Dominion. How is it that you endure? Not because we are the strongest, but because we refuse to be defeated in spirit. To see the being beneath it, that requires courage. And humanity has learned courage over millennia. We have faced extinction, oppression, famine, disaster, and yet we rise. We see those around us, not only enemies, but the beings who make choices just like we do. You are not merely a conqueror, Your Majesty. You are a being carrying unimaginable burdens. And that is what I see." She summoned Elias repeatedly to discuss matters beyond politics and conquest. He spoke of strategy, but not in terms of domination. He spoke of observation, alliances, and the subtle ways to maintain stability without fear. He told her stories of human civilizations that had survived near extinction, rebuilt from nothing, and emerged stronger for it. One evening she brought him to a quiet chamber, a place few had ever entered. Crystal walls glimmered, reflecting the faint violet light of the city beyond. "I have watched how humans operate," she said softly. You do not obey blindly, you do not surrender lightly, you adapt, you endure, and yet you can show mercy and understanding. How can such a fragile species possess this strength? It is not technological. It is moral, it is mental, it is emotional. It is what allows us to endure when nothing else remains. They forced her to reconsider what she thought she knew about strength, leadership, and survival. As the palace moved around them with attendants and guards busy with their duties, the queen walked beside Elias. "You speak of connection," she said, "of understanding, and yet your kind fought a war you could not win. You were on the brink of extinction. How does that not make you weak?" And perspective. It was not long before small incidents began to occur in the court. Other species within the Dominion noticed the queen's attention to Elias. They whispered that she was softening, that she was considering advice from a human. Some began to resent him. Others began to fear the subtle influence he might hold. Yet the queen ignored their murmurs, focused instead on understanding what this human had to offer. Then one day a rebellion was reported on a distant planet under the Dominion's control. Supplies had been sabotaged, and local leaders were in open revolt. The queen summoned her generals, prepared to crush the rebellion with force. But she paused, turning to Elias. "What would you do in this situation?" she asked. Elias considered the scenario. "Crushing the rebellion with force will restore obedience temporarily," he said. "But it will breed resentment, fear, and further resistance. Understanding why they rebelled, addressing their needs, offering them a choice, this is how humans survive. And this is how you maintain control without endless war." In the quiet moments after the meeting, the queen found herself reflecting on her empire, on her methods, on her life. Elias had not only survived in her court, he had begun to change her. Not through weapons, not through fleets, but through thought, words, and perspective. For the first time in centuries, Queen Zalithra wondered if the galaxy might be different if she had ruled differently. If she had listened more, observed more, understood more. And in that reflection, she realized something both terrifying and exhilarating. Humans, despite their fragility, had something she had underestimated all along. It was not courage. It was not technology. It was understanding. And understanding, she realized, could be far more dangerous than fleets of warships. The palace had grown quieter in recent days. The usual hum of activity continued, but there was a subtle tension in the air, a ripple of unease that the queen could not ignore. Reports from distant sectors arrived with increasing urgency. Several worlds under the Dominion's rule had risen in rebellion, and the violence was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. The queen, accustomed to crushing resistance swiftly and without mercy, now hesitated. She had learned, through Elias' words and presence, that there were ways to respond that did not rely solely on fear. And yet the instincts ingrained over centuries told her to act decisively, to strike quickly. Elias was summoned to the council chamber as soon as the reports arrived. The chamber, usually filled with the murmurs of advisors and generals, fell silent as the queen entered with her human guest at her side. The Zyra generals looked on with suspicion. They had heard whispers about the human who had spoken with the queen as an equal. They had watched as her decisions had been subtly influenced by his advice. And now, with rebellion spreading, some of them whispered openly that his counsel might weaken her rule. The queen addressed the council with clarity. "The rebels are not merely fighting for survival. They have been emboldened by fear, yes, but also by neglect. The Dominion has ruled with strength, and yet understanding has been absent. If we crush them without consideration, the cycle of rebellion will continue. I will not act blindly. They threaten your authority, your empire. Waiting, negotiating, understanding, these are luxuries we cannot afford. Strike now, or the Dominion will be weakened beyond repair." Elias met her gaze calmly, the weight of centuries of human survival behind him. "I would not strike first," he said. "Not because your forces cannot crush them, they can, but because crushing them does not solve the underlying problem. These people are rebelling because they feel unheard, unseen, and unconsidered. Strength alone cannot maintain an empire. Understanding, empathy, and strategy, these are the tools that allow a ruler to endure. I would seek to address their grievances, offer choices, and demonstrate that rebellion is not the only path. If they see reason, they may stand with you rather than against you." To consider patience, communication, or understanding as tools of power was almost unthinkable. And yet the queen considered Elias' words. She remembered the humans he had described, their resilience, their ingenuity, their ability to endure what others could not. Perhaps there was truth in his counsel. The queen decided to act with caution. She sent envoys to the rebelling sectors, not as conquerors, but as negotiators. Elias accompanied them, offering guidance on how to communicate with those who had lived under oppression and fear. He taught them how to listen, how to acknowledge grievances without surrendering authority, and how to present solutions that offered hope rather than punishment. The first encounters were tense. Rebels were suspicious of anyone associated with the queen. They had only known fear and brutality. Yet when they encountered humans speaking plainly and with respect, their skepticism wavered. They listened, debated, and even considered proposals they would have immediately rejected from a Zyra commander. Meanwhile, the queen observed from her throne world. She had sent her generals and a portion of her fleet to support the negotiations, ready to intervene if necessary. She watched as the humans' approach began to yield results. Worlds that had been on the brink of destruction were stabilizing. Leaders who had called for rebellion were now opening channels of dialogue, and in each instance, Elia's guidance was key. The queen began to reflect on what she had learned from humans. Strength alone, she realized, was not enough to rule an empire. Fear could command obedience temporarily, but understanding could command loyalty, and loyalty lasted longer than fear. She remembered Elias' words about perspective, courage, and resilience. She saw them in action now, transforming chaos into cooperation. But not everyone within the Dominion welcomed these changes. Some generals and officials grew restless, viewing the human influence as a threat. Secret meetings were held in shadowed corridors, plotting to remove Elias and assert traditional dominance over the rebels. Their whispers reached the queen's ears, though, and she understood that trust had limits in an empire built on fear. One night, as the stars shimmered over the throne world, the queen called Elias to her private chambers. The room was quiet, adorned with faintly glowing crystals that softened the edges of the space. "You have changed the way I see my empire," she said, her voice low. "And yet your influence has also made enemies among my advisors. They view you as a threat. How do you endure their distrust?" "That is what allows us to survive." A sudden alert interrupted their conversation. A message arrived from one of the rebelling sectors. A group of rebels had turned violent, defying negotiations and attacking Dominion forces. The generals were ready to respond with overwhelming force. The queen, however, paused and looked to Elias. "What would you do?" she asked. Elias considered the situation carefully. "Do not respond with brute force first," he said. "Go in with a clear plan for communication and containment. Show them that their choices have consequences, yes, but also that cooperation can bring them safety and stability. Humans have survived through negotiation and understanding as much as through fighting. Let that be our example here." Some chose to join the Dominion voluntarily, seeing a path forward that did not require destruction. The queen watched the process with a growing sense of awe. Humans, she realized, wielded a power she had never understood, a power that did not rely on fear, weapons, or domination. It was the power of insight, of patience, and of connection. She began to see her empire not only in terms of conquest, but in terms of relationships and understanding. That night, as the palace quieted, the queen summoned her generals. "You have seen what has happened," she said, "and you have witnessed how this human has influenced events. Do not mistake his presence for weakness. Observe, learn, and understand. There is more to leadership than fear, more to power than dominance, and more to survival than strength." Meanwhile, Elias returned to his quarters, reflecting on the progress made. He understood that the Dominion's trust was fragile, and that the path ahead would be filled with tests and challenges. Yet he also knew that humanity had endured worse. The ability to see beyond fear, to act with reason, and to build connections where others only saw obstacles was what had allowed them to survive. And now it was beginning to change the galaxy. The queen, alone in her chamber, stared out at the stars. She had ruled with certainty for centuries. She had commanded fleets, crushed rebellions, and enforced obedience through terror. And yet, Elias had shown her a different way. One human, speaking truth and observing carefully, had forced her to reconsider everything she thought she knew. For the first time, she wondered if she had been ruling not out of wisdom, but out of habit. If strength alone could not hold an empire, then perhaps there was something far more powerful in the traits humans embodied: resilience, insight, and the ability to endure while seeing the world clearly. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Elias, standing calmly, ready to report the day's developments. The queen regarded him silently, a faint smile touching her lips. "You have done well," she said, But the galaxy is still dangerous, and not all will accept this path. Be ready. And by seeing truth when others only see power. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to the struggles below. And yet, within the heart of the Dominion, a quiet revolution of thought had begun, led not by fleets or weapons, but by a human who saw clearly, spoke honestly, and endured patiently. The rebellion had been contained, but the seeds of change had been planted. The queen could feel it in the air, in the court, in the shifting loyalty of her generals. And she understood something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Humans did not conquer through fear. They conquered through perspective. And that was a force the Dominion had never faced before. The palace of the Zyra Dominion buzzed with activity as news of the contained rebellion spread. The queen, once unyielding and feared, now moved with a quiet purpose, guided not only by her instincts, but by the counsel of Elias Morgan. She had faced her empire in a way she had never imagined, considering perspectives she had previously dismissed, listening to voices she had once silenced, and observing truths she had chosen to ignore for centuries. Elias had done more than survive in her presence. He had changed her. Reports arrived from worlds that had been rebellious, now stabilized. The humans and Dominion envoys had negotiated peace, restored resources, and offered governance in a way that allowed the locals to retain dignity while remaining part of the Dominion. The generals and advisors were astonished. They had expected force and domination, yet diplomacy, understanding, and patience had succeeded where weapons alone would have failed. "Your Majesty," one general said cautiously, "the humans' methods, they are unprecedented. Worlds that were ready to rebel have submitted willingly. How is this possible?" "It is possible because humans see more than power. They see beings, not symbols. They understand choice, consequence, and connection. Their strength is not in fleets or weapons alone, it is in perspective, and that perspective can be more dangerous than any army." To be told that understanding could wield more influence than terror was unsettling. Some began to question the wisdom of their previous strategies. Others remained skeptical. The balance of power within the Dominion was changing, not through rebellion, but through insight. Elias was summoned to the throne room. The queen regarded him thoughtfully, a faint but genuine smile touching her lips. "Elias Morgan," she said, "you have done more than I ever expected. You have survived where others would have perished, spoken truths no one dared, and shown me something I did not know I had forgotten. Courage, insight, patience. Humanity's ways have shaken my understanding of the galaxy." "I did what any human would do," he said. "We endure, we adapt, we observe, and we speak when the truth matters. That is how humanity survives and perhaps how it changes the world." She remembered the first day he had spoken to her in the throne room, the way he had looked at her not as a monster, not as a ruler, but as a being carrying unimaginable burdens. She had felt something unfamiliar then, curiosity. Now she felt more respect, perhaps even admiration. For the first time, she saw humans not as fragile prey, but as equals in resilience and strategy. A sudden alarm interrupted the moment. The communications officer reported a fleet approaching the Dominion from the outer rim. They were unknown, heavily armed, and moving fast. The Queen's first instinct was to summon her fleet to prepare for annihilation. But she paused and looked at Elias. "What should we do?" she asked. Elias considered the situation. "Assess their intentions first," he said. "Strength alone will not guarantee survival. Humans have survived far greater threats through understanding and strategy, not sheer force. Let us see clearly before we act." The unknown fleet responded aggressively at first, but when the Dominion demonstrated readiness and willingness to negotiate, the fleet hesitated. Talks were initiated, and Elias advised the Queen on language and approach, emphasizing clarity, respect, and the willingness to understand rather than destroy. Hours passed as negotiations unfolded. The unknown fleet turned out to be mercenary forces, hired by a distant system to test the Dominion's strength. They had expected to find an empire vulnerable to rebellion and ready to crumble under pressure. Instead, they encountered a Dominion that had changed, not weakened, but transformed. The Queen negotiated with authority, using insight gained from human counsel. By the time the sun rose over the alien city, the mercenaries had withdrawn, convinced that confrontation was unnecessary and cooperation more beneficial. The court was stunned. They had expected war, yet peace had been achieved without a single shot fired. The generals, once skeptical, began to understand the truth of Elias' teachings. Perspective, patience, and connection could be as powerful as fleets, weapons, or fear. In the following weeks, the Queen implemented changes throughout the Dominion. Policies were reformed to give subject species more autonomy, grievances were heard and addressed, and systems that had been neglected were revitalized. Humans were instrumental in designing these reforms, advising not as subordinates but as partners. Their presence began to shift the culture of the Dominion. Fear was no longer the only tool of power. Trust, communication, and understanding became recognized as equally effective. One evening, the Queen and Elias walked through the palace gardens. The soft glow of bioluminescent plants illuminated their path. "Elias," she said quietly, "I have ruled for centuries with certainty, with fear, with force. Yet now I see that strength alone does not define an empire. Humanity has shown me a way I could not have imagined. You have done more than survive, you have changed me. And perhaps in doing so you have changed the galaxy. It is understanding, and that understanding can shape the future." For centuries, she had ruled through fear. Now she realized that humans, small and fragile as they seemed, had a weapon far more enduring: insight. Months passed. The Dominion stabilized, and rebellion ceased not through force but through dialogue and fairness. Worlds that had once resisted now cooperated willingly, inspired by the changes they witnessed. The galaxy began to notice. The reputation of the Zyra Dominion shifted, not as an empire ruled solely by fear, but as one that could balance power with understanding. And at the heart of that transformation was a single human. The Queen summoned Elias to the central throne chamber one last time. She sat on her throne, her expression calm and reflective. "Elias Morgan," she said, "the galaxy will remember this period not as one of conquest or fear, but as one of change. You have survived where none thought possible, and you have taught me lessons I could not have learned alone. Tell me, will your people accept me? Will they see that my intentions are no longer solely domination, but partnership?" "If you continue as you have started," he said, "if you rule with insight, fairness, and courage, humanity will not see you as a conqueror, but as a leader. They will not fear you, and they will not resist you. They will respect you, and that respect lasts longer than fear ever could. Then let this be the future," she said, "a future where the galaxy is ruled not only by strength, but by understanding, and where humans teach even the most powerful lessons." The galaxy watched in awe as worlds that had once trembled under Zyra Dominion now flourished under policies guided by fairness, understanding, and cooperation. Elias returned to his people, now ambassadors of peace and perspective. He had survived impossible odds, influenced the course of an empire, and demonstrated humanity's greatest strength: the ability to endure, adapt, and see truth where others saw only power. And Queen Zalithra, the ancient monarch who had never known hesitation, now ruled with a new clarity. The galaxy had expected dominance, fear, and conquest. Instead, it witnessed a partnership born of understanding, a force that could reshape civilizations without a single drop of blood. As the stars stretched endlessly above the throne world, indifferent and eternal, one truth became clear. The most dangerous, most enduring, most inspiring species in the galaxy was not the one with the largest fleets or deadliest weapons. It was the species that could endure, observe, and see the universe clearly. The species that could survive through courage, connection, and understanding. The species that could make even the greatest conqueror pause, reflect, and change. Humanity had not only survived. Humanity had changed the course of the galaxy. And the Queen, once feared above all, now understood what it meant to lead not only with power, but with insight, inspired by the human who had dared to see clearly, speak honestly, and endure patiently. The stars continued their silent journey across the heavens, but below them, a new chapter of the galaxy had begun, a chapter defined not by fear, but by courage, understanding, and humanity's enduring light.